Welcome back to panel number 5, standards, the role of standards for a sustainable recovery. Quite interesting topic, quite high on the list of importance in aviation. I couldn't find any better moderator for that as a head of a standard developing organization, Terry McVean at RTCA. RTCA and EUROCAE have a long history and working together. So I'm very happy, Terry, that you accepted our invitation to moderate this panel. Very important just for the audience for us is that we're having 50% of our activities at EUROCAE joint with RTCA. Joint means that's really at the end of the day, we are publishing the same technical content in the standard. So this is harmonization. This is really harmonization around the globe. And this is so important for us. We agreed this year that by default, every new work item we have should be a joint work item. We'll not use more time of this panel because we are looking very much forward to a very good discussion here. Terry, hand over to you and hear you later.
Well, great. Good afternoon, everyone, to our European colleagues. Good morning to those of you on this side of the globe. And I know since the audience is in several other locations and time zones, as I can offer a good evening to you. Thank you, Christian, for that great introduction. It's certainly a pleasure to be with all of you today and to be part of EUROCAE's annual symposium again this year. As Christian mentioned, the partnership that we enjoy with EUROCAE is vitally important to our collective work on behalf of governments and industries around the world. So I'm especially grateful to be here today on behalf of both of our organizations. Well, more than a year has now gone by since that global pandemic has impacted both our professional and our personal lives. A lot of times we think back to the events of 9/11, which has been almost 20 years ago now, and it also had a large impact to aviation. But that particular milestone was different than this one. It was more localized as to where it occurred, if you will, and it involved a source that was clearly identifiable. And so consequently, mitigations were quickly developed and implemented, many of which we're still living with today. But with the COVID-19 situation, we're dealing with a source that you cannot see or touch. It's not isolated to just one country or even one region of the world. It's worldwide. And so it's impacted airports, equipment, manufacturers, both large and small, air traffic control facilities, the airlines, and many of the pilots and air traffic controllers and technicians that operate as a part of the entire aviation ecosystem. Adding to that challenge that we all faced was what I can only characterize as the politicalization of the crisis by politicians and the media on both sides of the aisle. The science seemed to be all over the place depending on who you asked. And so consequently, and probably most importantly, there was no uniform response to the crisis. Each country, each state, and in some cases, each city and town did their own thing. And from a standardization perspective, there was no harmonization that Christian so eloquently talked about. And not only no harmonization nationally, but certainly not internationally. And an industry like aviation that is so dependent upon internationally recognized standards that are harmonized across the globe, this was probably the most difficult to watch and deal with. On the good side, though, we did see some great work. We saw ICAO work through its member states, through the ICAO Council's Aviation Recovery Task Force, the CART, which provided some practical and aligned guidance to governments and industry operators in order to restart the international air transport sector and develop recovery from the impacts of COVID-19 on a coordinated and global basis. We saw industry associations come together and find alignment, speak with one voice, share best practices with each other. And we saw some aviation OEMs even change their entire business models to repurpose their manufacturing plants to produce ventilators, masks, and other products to help support the needs of the medical community. And in the case of EuroK and RTCA, we formed a joint working group and special committee to develop a new set of standards for cockpit and cabin cleaning that many of the airlines are now using in their day-to-day operations. And this was really interesting because we found ourselves working with the medical community, with the Center for Disease Control, and in other organizations that we've never worked with before. So we all had to find ways to be resilient and be very flexible in the short term. And now, as we reach what is hopefully the nearing end of this crisis, we have the opportunity to reflect on what happened to us and start thinking about the lessons learned and what we can do differently in the future. And I think one thing we learned that as an industry, we were pretty ill prepared to face the challenges of this pandemic last year. Consequently, we learned that addressing the needed short-term goals were very reactionary. And really, as we think forward, we really need a more long-term recovery planning we can start working on today before the next crisis happens. Every one of the organizations that I deal with that are represented on this panel are thinking about the need for a sustainable long-term recovery. But we're not going to be able to do that individually or work in a vacuum. We have to engage with each other. We have to coordinate our actions so that we can continue to promote an optimal regulatory, operational, and technical framework. And for standards organizations like EuroK and RTCA, we have a role to play in this as well, and it's incumbent upon us to continue to engage with our industry and government partners so that collectively we can support those long-term sustainability goals that are so critical for the future success of our great industry. So what exactly is the role of standardization for a sustainable recovery? Well, that's the subject of this panel. And I'm very pleased to have an outstanding panel of experts on this topic from across the spectrum of our industry to discuss this with you all today. And I'll remind the audience that after we have an interactive discussion with the panelists, you're going to be able, you can submit some of your questions using the Slido polling app. So please make use of that function so that you can stay engaged with us during this discussion. So let's get started. It is an honor to introduce our panelists for today's discussion. With us today is my good friend, Carlos Cirillo. He's the Director of ATM Infrastructure at the International Air Transport Association. Welcome, Carlos. Marina Belinsky, Head of Sustainability for Airports Council International in Europe. Johnny Pring, the Manager of Europe Policy and Advocacy for CANSO. Frederic Delou, he's the Acting Executive Vice President in Europe for the International Federation of Air Traffic Controllers Associations. And Vincent Deveroy, Director of Aviation for ASD, the Aerospace and Defense Industries Association of Europe. So welcome all of you. I'd like to start with Carlos and ask Carlos a few questions, and we'll get the discussion going. So welcome, Carlos.
Thank you.
Well, you know, the Airline Association that you represent, IATA, is certainly, and certainly your member airlines have been had major impact to from the COVID-19 crisis, and you've been on a very strong campaign to defend your members going through this unprecedented situation. And I'm familiar with some of the measures because I fly still a little bit around the U.S. I've seen some of those measures that have gone in place. And I know some of those measures have been introduced to help facilitate some of the flights. And I know you've been involved with some of the standards activities in this respect. You want to talk a little bit about some of that work that IATA has been doing?
Thank you, Terry, and thanks, Christian, for the kind invitation to be here today. This has been a very challenging time for everyone. I want to highlight some points that I'll pick back on what you were saying about we are really dependent on global recognized standards and harmonized across the globe. If I go back to the beginning of the pandemic, one of the first challenges we have, and it's a very simple one that we all live with, NOTAMs. We just had so many different type of information coming from the States. There are very little harmonization. So we just didn't know where to fly, which flights were permitted, if you can fly cargo, if crew needs a testing, if crew needs to can fly there, who can fly there. So we need to get together, act very quick, and we get together with ICAO, and then we develop a standardized message so that states can tell the industry, tell the planes, tell the users where they can go. So that's so basic that for us it's normal that we live with that, but that in the beginning we see that this was not happening. In parallel, when we see the pandemic starting, we put together a document to make sure that at least trying to help the travel journey to be as safe as possible and to keep our planes flying. So we thought that we could do this. So we developed what we called IATA's Biosafety for Air Transport, a roadmap for restarting aviation. So that including was the basic for our contribution to the ICAO takeoff guidance. That is one of the outcome of the CART document. But of course, it didn't work. So we got all planes parked and then international traffic was shut down. Just last April, we had more than 18,000 planes parked. It's almost 7% of the global fleet. We all can imagine what does this represent in terms of impact to the industry. And we have to come with new guidance, new ways of helping our members. One was managing aircraft airworthiness for operation during and post-pandemic, because we have to help them with the maintenance part. That was something that we didn't expect. We never had that amount of planes parking at the same time. And all the OEMs, all the guidance, everything that we have was based on the normal operation. And I have issues like, for example, one related to the biobore. It's an additive for the fuel, and we saw that in one point there's only one approved additive available in the market, which was, by the way, not listed as one approved in Europe. So you can imagine how this play off. If you have only one, you cannot use in Europe. So we got together with the industry in Europe, with all the partners, and we keep the ball rolling. And then with all this thing happened, the borders closed. We faced with another challenge for our members to perform their on-site IOSA. Yeah, you probably are familiar with the IATA Operational Safety Audit. It's not only an international recognized and accepted system to access the operational management and control of the airlines, but also all IATA members are registered in IOSA, and they have to be registered in IOSA to be an IATA member. So we were in a situation that they cannot do the audit because the auditors, they cannot travel, they are not allowed to go to places. And then we have to react and come with a new way of doing the IOSA. We changed some of the process and the procedures, and we develop a new IOSA guidance just to operate during the COVID. And these include new elements like remote audit. And I remember recall from the last panel, Christian mentioned risk-based approach. And that's what we have been doing in aviation. So we are increasing our risk-based approach to how we deal with this. And that goes to the other topic that I wanted to mention is, okay, we stop flying, there's no flights. So how can we maintain the crew recency, medical training? And that's was another problem because they cannot comply with standards if they don't maintain that situation. So the solution was go back to ICAO, talk to ICAO and see how can ICAO, we all together, the industry together, put something to help states, the regulators, to allow for alleviation. But it was not only one state allowing for alleviation. The other state, they have to recognize that that state alleviation is okay. so they can fly internationally. So they have to come with a way for states to publish their alleviation and all at the same time recognize other state alleviation so we can keep international travel going. So they put together a system that's called contingent related differences, which now is transition for something more specific, because also we cannot stay with alleviation forever, as we know that's not safe. So starting now, in fact, last March, end of March, this system is transition for something that's called more target alleviation. And also, in other words, states will still be able to do alleviation for some of those ICAO standards, but they need to be very target, very specific, very basic on facts and risk-based approach again, to make sure that we still allow for those that cannot comply, for example, with simulators. There are states that they don't have simulators in airlines, they don't have access to, and they cannot fly to place to do the simulator because the border are closed. So those are the elements that we need to deal and continue to deal during this situation. Another thing that I want to make sure that I gave ICAO the kudos for the card. And as you mentioned, Terry, that was a very important milestone that we had, because it's not only that we have ICAO and the states, we have all the industry working together, all the stakeholders participate on the development of that takeoff guidance. At the beginning, it was a collection of guidance from all the organizations that were working together, not only us, ICAO, we have Council, ACI, IFALPA, all the I's working together to come with something that can be internationally used and see as and help us a lot during this period. Also was, I think, one of the first time that we have really the medical community working together, who participate in this work, and they come together with the ICAO testing and cross-border risk management manual that we really hope that the states will buy in and start using. But as you mentioned, we still see that very different approach from the states in terms of risk. It's probably because they are not the same, I would say, actors that we are used to deal with, like in aviation, that we are very used to a risk-based approach, and some of those that are taking the decisions, they are not very, I think, prone to a risk-based approach. It's all or nothing, and this, we know that things doesn't work like this. One good example for international cooperation, you mentioned this during your introduction, was the challenge we are facing also with things that seems to be normal, and when we don't look over it, was the cleaning and disinfection of aircraft. We have so many different requirements in places for cleaning and disinfection. They were not aligned, and we just didn't know how to behave or what to expect, and especially regulators, they didn't have anything to base on. And then it was, I think, with a very fast and quick reaction from both our TCA and AeroK together, with the industry, as you mentioned, with the medical community, came together and put something that it's really useful for our members. And this impacts something that it is directly related to the turnaround times of the aircraft. And this has impact on slots, has impact on capacity. So it's really something that, even though seems to be basic, but it's part of the whole operational structure. We have also focusing now on working in guidance for the transportation of vaccines. That's also something that we all rely on, and it's thankfully moving in the right direction. And lately, we have been focused on ways to reopen international travel that we're all looking for to happen. And that's why we are developing this IATA travel pass. And the idea is to reopen the borders without quarantine. And the governments, they need to be confident that they can mitigate the risk of importing COVID-19. And we think ITP is just a critical facilitator to enable airlines, airports to function in an efficient manner. For those who have traveled during this period, you know the paperwork, the difficult to board, deport, and look at. I had the opportunity to go through U.S. and Brazil with different airlines. Uh, every single place has a different requirements, a different document that you need to present. Requirements for the testing are different. They have asking for different elements. Some of the laboratories they don't produce what they are requiring. I have to do a test. Went to the airport, didn't accept. Have to go back to the different laboratory to do a different test because that laboratory didn't print the way the airline wants. So it's really something that we cannot rely on paperwork like this. We need something that's electronic and move things fast. So in a nutshell, that's just a bit what we have been doing. We have more on our website, but
Yeah, that's great. I mean, you mentioned the training aspect. I was on a call just last week with a group from the IFALPA, International Federation of Airline Pilots, and we were kind of doing around the room and how how things are being impacted. And one of the things, in the United States, where you got the big airlines that have their own training facilities that are all located here in the United States, there were challenges for the training and in bringing people back, but you did have the international aspect where in Europe and other places around the world where pilots have to be trained perhaps in another country, it was really, they'd then be subject to some quarantine issues and things like that. And it's just been a real mess. And I understand ICAO is trying to do some work around help that situation.
that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. From a business model standpoint, beyond just the the travel certificate that IATA is working on with the airline, you see any other perhaps long-term other changes to the business model airlines are looking at to prepare for the next crisis?
In fact, airlines have always looked into different commercial models to deal with the ever coming situations we have. It's one after another. Of course, this one was devastating. We used to call the black swan events for safety. This is the black swan of all black swans. So we never expect that something that major would happen to our members. So it really impacted us really at the bottom. But I see that we probably have some structural changes coming because the damage to the industry is very, very severe. One problem I see is that less debts are they're rising dramatically, and our airlines they have to borrow to survive, and they will have to pay back. And this means that we can see a limit ability to invest in fleet and new products, even to reward the investor from this initial period of time. That this initial, we don't know how long will be this initial as well, because it's all unpredictable.
Yeah, I think one final question for me for right now. Obviously, the airlines have to work very closely with their regulatory agencies and the governments. Is there any particular needs that you see that the airlines need from the various governments around the world?
Definitely, yes. As we prepare to go back, we need a plan. We are a very, I would say, resilient industry. We have a lot of process, procedures, risk-based approach, everything in place to start. But we cannot start with like a flip of the coin. We need a lead-in time. So we need states to start coming together with plans, with roadmaps. Those that really cannot do it, I'm sure that we as an industry together, as you mentioned, we can help them coming with plans that make sense, that they are reasonable. We saw some good examples. I would say UK come with a plan, even if it's not the perfect plan, but it's a plan. And unfortunately, where I'm sitting now in Canada is another example, bad example that we don't see anything. We don't see a plan. We don't see when things are going to be happening. And that's the plea we have to governments. So put together a plan. We just need to see when we are going to restart so we can start planning to safely start flying again.
Thanks, Carlos. Let's shift away now from the airline aspects and take a look at the impact on the airports. So Marina, welcome. It's good to have you with us today. I know ACI Europe's been really active, as is I know ACI here in North America has been really active, and we work with some of those at our TCA. And you've really been working with communicating the challenges that airports have had during the crisis. Can you talk a little bit about some of the main takeaways and how it's shaped some of the actions towards a recovery for the airports?
Yes, thank you very much, Terry, and thank you also to Eurokai for the invitation and the opportunity to be here today with you. So yeah, indeed, I mean, the airports have been significantly impacted by the crisis, along with the other actors in the air transport ecosystem. Just to add to the figures that Carlos mentioned before, if we look at the traffic trends in Europe, still in 2021, in the first quarter, we were at minus 82% of air traffic compared to the levels of 2019. So the crisis is still very severe. Of course, that entails also a huge revenue loss for airports. And I would say that for airports, the situation is also particularly challenging because over 30% of airport costs are actually fixed costs. The infrastructure needs to run, it needs to be maintained, even if you only have a couple of flights a day that come in. So that means that the margin also to adjust your cost base to decreasing revenues is really rather small. And this is clearly a big challenge. It also means for airport operators that today they are financing their operations through debt as well. And as Carlos mentioned before, for the airlines, we are also facing the situation where the capacity of airports to invest in long-term sustainability is really severely compromised. I think what that shows us, and also the overall crisis and the way it was handled also beyond aviation, is that when you face a crisis, actually you cannot afford any delay in dealing with it. So we have seen with COVID-19 that lack of action or delayed action has actually led to higher human and economic cost. And we feel that actually the same is likely to happen if we do not sufficiently anticipate another crisis, which is climate change in particular. So it means if we do not take ambitious action today to reduce our emissions, but still want to limit climate change to a certain extent, we will only need to make more deeper cuts in emissions in the future, and that will be more expensive. And furthermore, the more we let the climate change unfold, the bigger also will be the consequences that the climate change as such will have on our operations and our infrastructure. So we all have an interest in acting swiftly and in an ambitious manner when it comes to dealing with our climate impact. But that's something that is going to be extremely difficult in the current circumstances, given the financial situation of our sector. So I think that the key challenge for us as aviation industry as a whole will really be to see how we can bridge this gap between, on one hand, a really catastrophic financial business situation, and on the other hand, the need to act swiftly to become more sustainable in the long term. Speaking about the action that we took as ACI Europe specifically, I think it was really important for us, in spite of the crisis, to show that we still continue to lead on our various sustainability initiatives. So in that context, a couple of months ago, we launched a major development within our carbon management standard, a program that we have developed specifically to help airports address their emissions, which is called Airport Carbon Accreditation. And in that program, we have introduced 2 new certification levels, helping airports align their carbon management with the goals of the Paris Agreement. So this for us was really a concrete step that we decided to take in spite of the crisis and in spite of all the uncertainties on how airports will also be able to continue their sustainability action, really just to highlight that our commitment is still there. Yeah, I think looking further into the future, as was mentioned before, a key factor for success in bridging this gap between the short and the long term will be collaboration, clearly within the industry, but also between the industry and the policymakers. We need a stable and consistent policy frameworks that supports the industry in becoming more sustainable. And clearly in the current situation, we also need financial support.
This past November, you published a document called the Sustainability Strategy for Airports. What were some of the conclusions that were in that report?
So the sustainability strategy is actually a guidance document that we have developed for airports in order to help them embrace sustainability in its 3 dimensions. Obviously, when we speak about sustainability in the context of aviation, we usually tend to focus on the environmental aspects and in particular also climate change. But of course, there are also social and economic components. So we really tried to guide our airports through the strategy document by defining recommended actions, also by defining metrics that can help airports assess and measure where they stand in terms of sustainability and also then define improvement actions accordingly. We actually had published this document initially back in 2019, but we did make some updates to it in the context of COVID-19, just reflecting on the crisis. So what we have further developed compared to the initial version of the document were, for instance, all the actions that relate to engagement with local communities and really also trying to see how the airport can help the recovery of local communities from the crisis. And another element is also that we were really thinking on what should be like the key enabler for airports to become more sustainable. And for us, in the end, it's something that relates to governance and decision making. And this is where one of our key recommendations for airports is actually to make sure that non-financial aspects, more specifically non-financial value and non-financial costs, are integrated into the decision making of the company. So we feel that you cannot really become a sustainable airport operator if you consider sustainability as a sort of add-on to your activities. It really needs to be placed at the core. And of course, that's quite a challenging exercise that also in the end requires to overall rethink the airport business and consider how and where you can create value also beyond the aeronautical component as such.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into when you think about it, a broad sustainable recovery across the entire aviation ecosystem. You know, how do you work with maybe some of the other parts of the industry in the actions that you're doing and coordinating it with some of the other parts of the sectors?
Yeah, I can mention a concrete project that we have worked on over the last 2 years with our colleagues from the industry. So in particular, A4E, ASD, CANSO, and ERA, and Vincent and Johnny, who are also on this panel today, were also very actively involved. It's a project called Destination 2050, which actually represents decarbonization roadmap that we have developed for European aviation. And this decarbonization roadmap actually leads us to net zero CO2 emissions from all flights departing European airports by 2050. So it was really a key step that we took jointly as European aviation industry to align our climate ambition with the objectives of the European Green Deal. Obviously, we then also as an industry, we have committed also to reach this goal, and there are different pillars of action that we have to work on to make it happen. And of course, it includes a lot of investment in sustainable aviation fuel, for instance, but also new aircraft technologies and in particular new aircraft energy systems. So we have basically a detailed report that underpins our general pathway. But here, once again, I think our key ask is also that we need support from the policymakers to make basically this transition to our goal happen. And with that in mind, we have also put forward the idea of an EU Pact for Sustainable Aviation, in which we expect to bring together, on one hand, the industry commitments and the industry roadmap as developed through Destination 2050 with a regulatory roadmap on the side of the policymakers. So that's all work in progress, but we really feel that we need to strengthen the cooperation between industry and policymakers on this specific aspect.
Great. You know, I have conversations with the airport folks, and we're always kind of looking at, you know, how can standards help, you know, not only, you know, the dealing with some of the current situations that the airports are dealing with, but again, looking towards the future, you know, what is the role of some standards that would be helpful to the airport community?
Yeah, I think that actually, especially if we take a long-term perspective, standards for airport infrastructure in particular will play an absolutely critical role to enable the entry into service of new aircraft technologies, and in particular also to enable flights of hydrogen-powered aircraft, for instance, or electrified aircraft operations that are also all part of our Destination 2050 roadmap. Because, I mean, ultimately, these aircraft, they will have to fly to different airports, and wherever they fly, they will need to basically enjoy the same level of service. They will need to refuel, recharge, and so on. And in that respect, yes, absolutely, we need standards, and we need standards, I would say, as soon as possible, in the sense that airport infrastructure is developed for the long term. Therefore, the more we can already anticipate today in the different infrastructure projects that airports are carrying out, what will be expected from them in the future, the more effective we will be able to be. So I think this is really a critical element. At the same time, while obviously the aviation industry as a whole is very international, so we need a lot of harmonization, standardization as a general principle. Airports are a bit specific in the sense that they have also a lot of local specificities. So they are a bit of a local component in this overall international ecosystem. So while standards are important, it's also always key that there is room for some flexibility, so that specific local operational situations, challenges can be accommodated.
Great insight, Marina. Thank you. So we've talked about the airline perspective. We got the airport's perspective. The next thing I want to take a look at is from the air navigation service providers, the ANSPs. So we'll go to Johnny. Welcome. Obviously, it has impacted the ANSPs, this COVID crisis, and so there's been responses from your sector of aviation as well. And as the voice of ANSPs, I'm sure you've had quite a few challenges along that way in the last year or longer. So in this context, could you talk a little bit about some of the developments, maybe some of the improvements in air traffic management that's been the result of the crisis?
Indeed. Thank you very much for the introduction and also for inviting me to be part of this panel. on behalf of CANSO. So yes, just as for all the other actors in aviation, this has been very difficult for air traffic management. That's no surprise. We do operate in a slightly different context to other actors, because our members have an obligation, a legal obligation, to maintain a full service. So they've had to do this even though there's been the drop in traffic, and they've had to do so in a public health emergency. They can't scale down their operations, so the ATCOs are still going into the air traffic control centres. And our members, the air navigation services providers, have had to introduce very specific, rigorous health protocols. That has not been easy. I know it's not been easy for the ATCOs. They have cooperated and they've applied themselves. And I think our members have actually done a very good job in meeting that obligation, obviously through the work of the ATCOs, which has been essential, and all the other staff. So they have ensured the continuity of services. And that's, I think, been the biggest challenge for our members. Looking beyond that, you asked about improvements. I think if that could be summed up in one word in terms of the ambition, it's digitization. Digitalization is already a process which has started within aviation, and certainly this is the case for air traffic management. This means, of course, increased automation to enable exchange of data. It means that this is something which is going to be ongoing for many years. And we see the potential, maximizing the potential of digitalization as a key to the future in the success of aviation. This is going to play an increasingly important role in the future of our industry. It's going to enable us to deliver a more scalable air traffic management system, one that's economically sustainable, environmentally efficient, and more resilient in the long run. So we can already see the benefits in some areas. Remote towers, I think, is a good example. So air traffic services for airports are provided from a remote location where the controllers have no direct visual access to the aerodrome, but they can nonetheless provide that service. And a number of our members are already applying remote control towers. This is just one example, and this is, we hope, the start of something which is going to be carried on in many other areas. We've seen in some areas that some of our members, the ANSPs, have used the crisis to accelerate this transition to digitalization, but they need to have the capability to continue to invest so they can carry on with that transition, and also so that they can deliver the capacity when the traffic returns, and of course beyond when the traffic returns, because the traffic recovery is in itself going to take a few years, but then there's all of the time beyond that when we hope that traffic will continue to grow again.
You know, the digitization piece, I think, you know, that was a subject, I believe, of the first panel on Wednesday at the symposium. And certainly a lot of discussion about that. It seems to be a pretty big effort these days. Do you see a role of standards in helping get those that digitization, saying that wrong, out there and help to get it implemented more quickly?
Absolutely. I think standards are essential. There's no doubt about that. Our members have played an active role in the development and the validation of standards. I know in Europe, they're very active with EUROK, and we see this as essential for the deployment of new ATM technologies. Digitalization means standardized, or it's going to require standardized interfaces so that there is interoperability between different ATM systems. So that's required for the rollout on a European-wide scale. And just bear in mind the geography we have in Europe with many different ANSPs. There's one for each country, and a flight across Europe can take in many different countries. So that standardization is required to have that interoperability. If I can just name some examples, I mean, EUROK is obviously very active in this area, and there are some that we see as being particularly important for ATM. One is virtual center. There's already a working group on this. This is going to support location independence of future operations. So the example of the remote tower would be done on a bigger scale, and you could then, in theory, at this stage, you could provide services to a different geography as an area control center. So the data would not be controlled, not contained locally, and you can then provide that service. The ANSPs will not need to have their own infrastructure. So that's something which we see as being important. With that, a related area, and also there's another EuroK working group on this, which is SWIM, System-Wide Information Management. So this will be an enabler for the infrastructure. The virtual centers will use SWIM to provide their services. And again, the standardization is required to ensure interoperability. Another very important area is drones, unmanned aircraft systems. There's another EuroK working group. This is another area which we think is going to grow. It's going to bring in new market entrants. It's an important step for the digitalization of ATM. So that's certainly an important area. And lastly, one I'd like to mention, which is artificial intelligence. So this can bring higher levels of automation, for example, through voice recognition, to enable the monitoring of aircraft movements. And again, there is a EuroK working group which has recently started its work. I would, however, just add one point, which is that we should be selective. That standardization, it of course requires a lot of work, and we should distinguish between those areas where standardization is needed, because there has to be this harmonization, and where it is an optional extra. And we, of course, would focus our resources, and we would encourage EuroK and others to focus their resources on the areas where they are needed. But that's a discussion to be had for the ongoing future.
Yeah, I think that's a real big deal, because and even the application, defining where the application of machine learning and artificial intelligence can best be used, where it's too early to be thinking about using it. So putting a little bit of a box around it, as there's some places where it may be applicable and some places where it's not. And I think certainly as an industry, that's an area we got to kind of help define a little bit better, at least in my opinion anyway. In both Europe and here in the United States, there's been a lot of efforts underway to modernize the air traffic management systems. We call it next gen. What kind of impact to those efforts occurred because of the COVID-19 situation? Did it slow things down? Did you see any kind of changes, or even a change in directions of where that modernization was going as a result?
As I mentioned, there have been some areas where we've seen that our members have speeded up a transition, which was probably already ongoing. But we've seen many more areas where our members have had to postpone non-critical investments, or even or delay non-critical investments. So that's a hindrance, and this is not going to be easy to overcome. It does delay the onset of digitalization. We hope that this is something that we can overcome, but it does highlight the financial impact of this crisis. The reduced liquidity of the sector makes the collaboration that we need to align our future much more important. So this is going to require some thinking and probably some support from governments. But for us, the transition to the digital European sky in Europe is very important. We and our members remain committed to that. There are these projects under the CESAR joint undertaking, and that program runs until 2024. There are other projects which are set out in the ATM master plan here in Europe, with deployment scenarios running until 2035. So this vision remains valid, and the plans that are made, we hope, can still be implemented. It's important that we do apply these. It's going to make the ATM system more scalable. It's going to make it greener, more predictable, more resilient to disruptions such as the one that we are undergoing at the moment. But yes, there has been this issue of budget cuts which have been effectively imposed as for the other players in the market. And it's been tough for the whole sector, there's no doubt. Let's see, we hope we can still apply all of those plans. Our members can all apply all of those plans and continue to invest sooner rather than later.
Yeah, that's great, because obviously all those changes that are, you talk about the virtual centers and the digitization, all that stuff is going to continue to help to keep moving things that direction. Is there anything else you see as necessary for a sustainable recovery?
I think the previous speakers touched on them, that we have a need as a sector for governmental support, both in terms of the regulatory framework and in terms of funding. So just going back to the example of CESAR, in the cases where our members cannot continue to invest through the duration of this crisis, or maybe just for this year and for next year, we have called on governments to come forward and actually meet the shortfall. So they would be providing 100% funding. And this is something we've already set out. There was a report which also ACI and ASD participated in, which was published 6 months ago, called the Aviation Roundtable Report, which is another European initiative. And this calls for broadly relief funding from the EU and from governments on a non-discriminatory basis for the whole of the aviation sector. That is still needed. And then within that, we also called for this increase in the case of CESAR, and then there are other examples, which I'm sure the other members can talk about. So that's something we still see as being valid. The Destination 2050 report, which Marina mentioned, of course, is very important for us. But again, we need the industry needs governments to meet our commitments with their own policy commitments. That's something which that's probably a bit more longer term than what is in the Aviation Roundtable report, because we're talking there in sometimes for initiatives that will take place maybe after the recovery has come. But nonetheless, we see that as being important as well. So yes, governments can play an important role in both those aspects.
Great, thank you, Tony. Appreciate that insight. Continuing on the topic of ANSPs, but on a little different dimension, the COVID crisis has shown us many examples where seasoned aviation industry stakeholders were laid off or chose to take early retirement. That had the impact of leaving limited experts available just to survive the crisis. So I'd like to turn my attention over to Frederick from the IFATCA organization to provide a little bit of insight. Can you talk a little bit about how this impacted the ranks of air traffic controllers, and how did IFATCA help support your member organizations?
Sure, thanks, Terry. Allow me first to thank IRCAI for the invitation to engage as a speaker in this very important event. And my first words actually will have to be for friends, colleagues, and their families who have been suffering and are still suffering from the pandemic, let it be at a personal or at professional level. To come back to your question, indeed, IFATCA saw a variety of departing professionals, highly skilled and trained professional, not only at coast, but also experts and ATSEPs who have been either forced to leave or have taken voluntary retirement. We saw as well salary cuts to the extreme of 70% in certain places. Roster rules have been broken, resulting in fatigue and stress, halting of training in many places, and we suffered the lack of vision of the traffic rebound. But nevertheless, we kept actually ready for this recovery through various programs. So apart from the states that financially supported ANSPs, as Johnny has been mentioning just now, we had to overcome this tremendous downturn in income while keeping the infrastructure. IFATCA saw many cases where the consequence of the lower income was passed on to staff because the buffers were quite marginal. So very rapidly, the ANSPs were running out of cash. You most probably have heard about the Eurocontrol initiative to provide a loan to the Eurocontrol member states in the core of last year, April and June last year. But allow me as well to praise the professionalism of the ADCO staff who remained on duty to ensure the essential service. And essential service that could continue since the beginning of the crisis, as they basically relentlessly made sure that medical supplies, cargo flights, repatriation flights could take place smoothly and efficiently despite certain immediate measures affecting them. IFATCA supported its MAs and aviation stakeholders with professional support. We tried to identify the immediate challenges. The most important was to actually protect the health of the staff and to continue to control safely the traffic which was coming to us. So that was the highest of our priority. Next to that, it was to continue to control, despite a lot of staff were put under quarantine, and we had to limit the impact on various groups within the ops environments. We also developed some advices on the survival of the NSPs, and we started reflecting on the long-term impact on our industry. To this end, IFATCA published some guidance materials, letters and articles, and you can find all this on the IFATCA website at ifatka.org. Our goal is to develop more resilience of our industry by ensuring the safe, a continuous, stable, efficient, and sustainable system. You might concur that going from one crisis to another to envisage changes and then drop the ideas once we go back to business as usual, this cannot be our daily policy. It cannot continue like this. And IFATCA wishes to go further and start debates as how to deliver the stability we all need for the aviation industry. Let it be when it comes to the delay crisis or the financial crisis that we have also had to support after 2008 and the consequences thereafter. So IFATCA has made has proposed some solutions, and we are more than willing to help and share with our colleagues in the industry. One of the key points, of course, standardization is very high on our agenda, but one point that we want to stress is the need for defragmentation at network level in Europe. It is clearly a political decision. It has come now more than ever. If we want to deliver the sustainability, we have to actually support this idea that now comes the time to defragment this network. Thank you.
Great. Carlos mentioned a little bit in his discussion on the impacts of training to the airlines. Has it affected any, say, IFATCA's policies on competency-based training and assessment and a refresher training? What has been that impact?
Yes, indeed. IFATCA has provided quite a lot of advice to its member associations, and also we exchanged ideas and solutions among our member associations on how to deal with training in times of low traffic demand. For instance, we advise to postpone the checkouts of controllers. Some of the NSPs decided to do partial checkouts in the simulators, and with whatever was left of traffic at a certain time of the day. We advise to go for more frequent simulator for refresher training. We advise to combine and decombine sectors in ACC and working position in towers to keep staff acquainted with their routines, but also exposed to a certain level of traffic when it was possible during the day. But surprisingly, in certain places, the busiest times were during the nights with the cargo hubs, for instance, let it be Cologne, Leipzig, Amsterdam, Liège, in the area where I work, for instance, where you have the cargo hubs. So we saw a novel system as well being proposed to allow for computer home-based training. New automatic simulations were developed for reskilling of the controllers. And all this was feasible with a high flexibility of the staff concerned. It's actually important in the restart is that some areas might be rapidly gaining again traffic, and the limit of capacity, in particular intra-European sectors. So there is a need to be ready for this, and I am confident that in most places everything has been done to keep the controllers really up to speed and to retain their competence into being able to deliver the service that they used to be delivering. So on the other side, some hasty decision, somehow the same that we have experienced after the 2008 financial crisis, were taken. So one of the first one was to stop the training and the recruitment of new controllers, to send people on early retirement, even fire experts, which are also needed into the system to be able to continue the development, or the engineers to be able to actually feed and develop the systems. These people were let go. And so, I mean, this might be looking good on Excel management, but we all know what the consequences will be, and we will see them very rapidly when the recovery will come. And of course, this will be then quantified with the delays, and these delays have a high cost as well, and they do not allow the airlines to deliver their services, to do their business. So this is what concerns us as well, is that by taking these measures hastily, we just have basically cut some of the possibilities of a sane recovery and to be able to quickly recover from this crisis. So it took actually 10 years to recover after 2008, the 2008 financial crisis. So that can actually at the moment give us the flair what to expect in the coming years if nothing else is actually done.
And as you look towards the future from an operational standpoint, do you see any specific changes to the model that controllers are going to be using so that they're either better prepared for the next crisis or being more resilient to the next crisis?
Well, again, we shouldn't actually go from one crisis to the other to reflect and implement institutional and organizational solutions. There are high-performance cross-border models with clear, efficient, and tangible deliverables existing for decades. They should be used to build a future model to ensure the safe, continuous, stable, efficient, and sustainable model we want for the European network. It is the aviation industry as a whole that has to be operationally and financially prepared. When resilience becomes an inseparable key element of all industry stakeholders, including for the collaboration of states, then controllers can play their part as well. Again, I come back to the idea of defragmentation that I mentioned earlier. This is one of the key elements that we need to push forward and to push also the political world to embrace, but to pragmatically do it with examples and the good practice that we've seen over decades, which are not often, brought forward in certain of the debate. At the outbreak of the pandemic, it was obvious that the system was not prepared. So let us learn our lessons and take the necessary steps to integrate the services, to defragment in order to be better prepared for the next crisis, because crisis will always actually be there. But it's how we prepare and how we can be resilient to actually recover and limit the impact of this crisis on our industry. So we need to be able to serve better the aviation industry as a whole with innovative, performance, and socially acceptable solutions. Again, IFALCA is ready to participate constructively to deliver shared solution and to make sure that we can actually have benefits for all the industry and for all the people working in this industry. Thank you.
Great, that was some great points about the defragmentation and the resiliency, so that you're not being reactive, you're continually, you have put the things in place so that you can continue to operate, whether there's in a safe and efficient manner, whether there's a crisis or not. And I think that's a really excellent point, so thank you. I'd like to invite Vincent to the stage. Good to see you again, Vincent. Your members are part of the aerospace and the defense industry manufacturers, and certainly have had a huge impact to them during this crisis, coupled with facing a lot of political and regulatory pressure to get the products developed and new solutions that involve the environment, for example. And sometimes you're up against some really strict deadlines, whether it's greener aircraft, zero emissions, whatever it might be. So what are your main challenges with regard to some of these different pressures that the manufacturers are facing today?
Yes, thank you. So first of all, in terms of the impact of the pandemic on the manufacturing industry, of course, this has been a very huge impact. European aerospace industry is by nature a global industry, exporting to all parts of the globe. And I think, Terry, you said it, unlike 9/11, this is a global crisis. So if you're a global industry, global crisis means major impact. I think there have been two types of impact of the pandemic on our members. The first one is the impact of the pandemic as such on production and manufacturing. And the second one is the impacts on aviation, which then creates again an impact on our members and production of aircraft and the amount of aircraft they can deliver and sell. So in terms of the impact on manufacturing, the first lockdowns last year, they were the most devastating because borders were closed overnight. So of course the industry, the governments were not prepared for this. So for example, we didn't have masks for protecting employees working in a production environment. When the borders were closed, parts were stuck at borders and could not be delivered to manufacturing plants. So basically what it meant is that during the first lockdown last year, certainly within Europe, manufacturing almost came to a standstill. Of course, we all have learned from this experience last year, and I can say that now, although we are still in a severe phase of the pandemic, that manufacturing is back, of course, with a lot of precautions to protect the employees and all that, but it's working more or less. What is now more the problem for us is, of course, the wider impact on the aviation sector and what this creates to the manufacturing industry. So, of course, when your customers are in a very difficult situation, so be it the airlines, the ANSPs, or to some extent even the airports, it has impacts on us. And so all the airlines want to delay delivery of new aircraft. So we have to reduce production. So the OEMs have reduced their production by 30 to 40%. depending on the aircraft types. This has not only impact on the OEMs, by the way, it has also major impact on the whole supply chain working under the OEMs. So you have first level, second level, and even third level suppliers. Some of them are SMEs or mid-cap companies. They are very specialized in developing one part of the aircraft. They were working before the crisis on business plans with a ramp up to 40% more production. Overnight, they had to reduce to minus 30, minus 40%. So what this meant is that a lot of these companies needed financial support so to survive the immediate impact of the crisis. Now we are talking then, of course, about how to recover. So the first thing to recover, of course, is make sure people fly again, opening up borders in a safe manner so that the money comes again towards the system, through the airlines and then the airports and the NSPs, so that they again have money to invest. But then also, and it was mentioned already by some of the previous speakers, when we build back the sector, we have to look at the sustainability. So sustainable recovery is very important for ASD and its members. So that's also why we were part of this Destination 2050 initiative, which shows that European aviation can reach net zero emissions by 2050 by working basically on all the pillars which are needed, but including, of course, also aircraft and engine technology. And that's one of the parts we are focusing in the manufacturing industry on. So the research on all these new type of aircraft, which will basically enter into service from the mid next decades onwards. So for this to happen, research has to start now. And there is not a single pathway actually in terms of technologies which will need to be developed. We have the hydrogen potential solution, hydrogen powered aircraft, which certainly look very interesting. There's a lot of challenges to be addressed, but it's not the only way. We also have to work on improvement to existing aircraft and engine technologies to work on what we call ultra efficient next gen aircraft, which will reduce fuel consumption by 30%. But not only that, they will also be capable to fly on 100% sustainable aviation fuels compared to the existing aircraft, which, as you probably know, are only certified to fly based on a blending of 50% SAF. And then we also have to work for the smaller ends of the market on hybrids and electric solutions for rotorcraft and regional aircraft. So all these technologies will play a role in the whole decarbonization roadmap for aviation. Our Destination 2050 report actually shows that when we talk about 2050, new technology will result in 37% reductions in CO2. As it also was mentioned before by a few of the previous speakers, we cannot do this alone. We need support from governments to have a stable policy framework, but also even more important to provide funding. So for us, funding means also funding for research through programs like the Clean Aviation Program in Europe, also CESAR for the ATM program. And because of the COVID crisis, again, we need probably more support than before. Because when companies are in crisis, the first thing they will do is to reduce the longer term investment and focus on the short term. That, of course, doesn't match with research, which always will be longer term. So one thing which is also mentioned in the Aviation Roundtable report, which Johnny has mentioned, is we also need to increase the co-funding rates for research and maybe temporarily even go to the maximum possible, even where possible, 100% funding, certainly for SMEs, so that research can continue during the crisis and that we are ready for the recovery. So that's very important. In that respect, apart from the funding, there is of course also the important role to be played by the regulators. You're not going to develop those technologies only for the European market, so ICAO will play a very important role to set the global standards, work together with the likes of EASA, FAA, but also work together and with the standardization bodies. So standardization bodies will have a key role to play to set the detailed standards to comply with these global regulatory frameworks and standards. And here we need to work together with EUROCAE, RTCA, other standardization bodies. I think we need to work together in a collaboration. We should avoid competition between standardization bodies because that wouldn't be too efficient from an industry point of view. I think every standardization body has a focus where it's best to do certain things. So there's a lot of work to do. I think what we need to be clear is who does what, how do we move forward and work on that, because a lot of standards will need to be developed. Marina mentioned, for example, hydrogen on the airport side. That's something, and electric, that's clearly something which we need. But also if you talk about, for example, the maintenance of these new aircraft, ATC procedures which will be impacted, all that has to be looked at, and we need to be ready for that, because we cannot afford to develop a brand new type of novel technology and then all of a sudden we discover, well, maybe we can implement it in Europe, but the rest of the world is not ready. So standards here will play really a key role, and yes, the industry is really ready to move forward on that. So that's a snapshot of where we are. So the focus is really on this sustainable recovery, and let's work together to make it happen.
Great. I think that's a good point in some of the conversations I've had with my counterparts in the other standards organizations. Is like I tell them, there's plenty of work to go around. Let's just make sure we're not duplicating that work, because that's not beneficial to the industry at all. It just makes things more difficult. So we are really trying to do what we can to collaborate a little bit amongst us standards organizations to address that issue. Just one more question for you, Vincent. Just from a working together perspective with your member organizations, as you work through this crisis, did you see more collaboration with them or between them, or was everybody kind of just working on their own?
No, I think we really stuck together. I would say we stuck together within ASD, and I mean, Destination 2050, we stuck together with the other aviation stakeholders. So certainly within ASD, last year, the first lockdown, we immediately sat together with working level people, but even with board members at CEO levels at the companies to really see what needs to happen here to immediately stabilize the industry, to help the supply chain, what was mentioned, because this is a big worry for everybody in ASD, that if these small companies go under, it's not only about these small companies going under, it's that these small companies hold critical technologies working for the bigger companies. So we would have huge disruption. So, and then with the other associations, so yes, we work very frequently together. So I think it brought us probably even more together than ever before.
Great. Just to kind of wind things up, I want to ask each of the panelists 3 questions. They can only answer with one word. It's a little bit of what I call a lightning round. And we'll use that as kind of our conclusion for today's event. So I'm going to ask 3 questions. You get 1 word to answer, and I'll go right around the room. So try to make it 1 word. And I'm only going to ask 3. So first one is, did this crisis bring the aviation industry closer together or drive us further apart? Closer, further, or perhaps no change? Carlos.
Closer.
Marina.
Closer.
Johnny.
Closer.
Frederick.
Defragmentation.
Okay. Vincent.
Closer.
Okay. Next question. Did the crisis bring industry with better collaboration with the government or worse collaboration with the government? Better, worse, or no change? Carlos?
I would say different.
Okay. Marina?
No change.
Johnny?
Delayed.
Frederick?
Closer.
And Vincent?
No change.
And the last question, is our industry stronger today or weaker today because of this crisis, or no change? Carlos?
Stronger.
Marina?
Weaker.
Johnny?
Weaker. Stronger
Frederick?
tomorrow.
Okay. Frederick?
Weaker and less defragmentation.
And Vincent?
Weaker unless more government support.
Excellent. I think that's a good way to end. We do have a couple of questions from the audience, but I think we're capturing those, and we'll get those questions answered individually because we're running out of time. So I do want to thank our panelists today, Carlos Rula from IATA, Marina Belinsky from Airports Council International Europe, Johnny Pring from CANSO, Frederic Delou from IFACTA, and Vincent DeVroy from ASD. Great discussion, panelists. Thank you. I appreciate your participation today. And I'll turn things back over to Christian. Thank you for the opportunity to moderate this panel today. I think we had a good set of panelists that did a great job, and thank you. So Christian, back over to you.
Thank you very much for that, Terry. Thanks for moderating this panel. Thanks the panelists also from our side for joining us today. It was quite an interesting discussion you had here. So with this, we end our part of the symposium with panelists. Now we enter another very important part of this symposium, which we normally always have when we have physical symposia, and that's part of the so-called award night. Yes, last year we had to cancel that. This year we wanted really to have that because it's one of our strengths in a standard developing organization that we are having our members, our experts, our leadership team in the working groups developing standards, having our members around the world, having our supporters around the world, believing in what we are doing and trying to have this consensus-driven way, this collaboration you were mentioning in your panel before, this collaboration. That's a way, that's an equal way to find the consensus and develop the standards we are relying on. So with this, I hand over to the master of ceremony. Historically, that was always the case. Alex did, and he's very good in that. So I will not steal him the show, and I hand over to Alex. Thank you very much.